Hello, Michael.
Hey, well,
How's it going?
doing well. How are you?
Pretty good. What are we talking about today?
I think we're talking about rotational grazing.
What is that?
Well, I'm not entirely sure on a technical definition, but if I were to just break down the word parts, I would say it's probably grazing that rotates. So maybe like a pasture that's on a swivel that kind of like moves with the underneath the cows or something like that. But we have some experts on, so maybe we should ask them.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, that answer. Kevin, you want to jump in and give us an actual answer?
From my years of doing this rotational grazing, what I really look at is this, the time plan movement of the livestock around a well managed pasture. So I mean, there's so many various ways to do it, tons of different ways to fence. Some people can do it, with absolute minimal fencing. Some people have set paddocks. So it's really flexible movement and getting livestock where they need to be at the right time and right growth stages.
To me, rotational grazing is actually where my employees, of which we have about 90 of them, they have all-weather cabs, they're four-wheel drives, they're harvesting, digesting, manure spreading units that will actually annually lay down and give you a stock split. And so essentially rotational grazing is a controlled movement of livestock of any species through a system where they harvest their own forages.
Welcome to Field Notes from UW-Madison Extension. I'm Will Fulwider, and I'm joined by my co-host, Michael Geissinger. We bring farmers, experts, and agronomists to the table to talk about research-based approaches to the issues facing agriculture in Wisconsin.
Joking aside, and those good definitions ahead of us, I'm excited to be talking about one of my favorite agronomy and livestock topics today, which is rotational grazing, with some of the best people to talk to about it in the state. So we're joined by Mary C. Anderson and Kevin Mahalko today. Mary C. is a Wisconsin DNR Grazing Specialist, retired dairy farmer, and current grass-fed beef farmer near the Whitehall, Wisconsin area. And Kevin is a grass-fed dairy farmer near Gilman, Wisconsin, where he is also a grazing educator for River Country RC&D. Kevin also serves as the president of Grassworks in Wisconsin, which is a grassroots organization focused on grazing. Mary C. and Kevin, thanks for coming on today. Could you take a minute to share some background about your role and farms and what your rotational grazing setup looks like? And Mary C., we'll start with you.
Okay, we have a farm, like you mentioned. We are just about in the middle of perfect central of Trumpelow County. So we are in the Driftless area. We have two farms. One farm is about 115 acres, and that is set up in 8 large paddocks, of which they are subdivided into smaller subunits, typically acre, acre and a half in size, where our herd is moved through their paddock rotation as well as we harvest forage. We're 100% grass-fed, grass-finished. And then, of course, our other property, because it's a little more remote, we actually just do seasonal grazing there. So the livestock come in the spring, they rotate around the property throughout the summer, and then about deer hunting season, we take them back to the home farm. My full-time duties with the Wisconsin DNR is we are actually efforting doing managed grazing with a little bit of a twist because it's more of a conservation grazing on public grasslands across Wisconsin, and those grasslands are under the care of the wildlife management. And we are working with our partner farmers to bring livestock onto the properties and rotationally graze them. Kevin, do you want to talk about your operation a bit?
Well, farm, looking at almost 30 years ago at this point, we started, really getting, some interest in what are these crazy grazer people doing? And like, we'd always done some pasturing. It was always very, component of our family farming history. And Mary was actually one of the leading kind of evangelists about grazing even way back then. So we got in with a lot of really great neighbors and the grazing networks, which is why personally I still love being a part of that. But our farm it's been like a 30 to 50 cow dairy, traditionally all these years. And we've gotten into also doing some grass-fed beef sales, and then kind of more about 20 years ago we started transitioning to organic. So we've been with the organic side now for over, I think, 12, 13 years. So it's grazing has given us a lot of flexibility, even right from the start, like, a way to do a successful dairy farm in the conventional market. I remember in those days, like, a lot of neighbors were doing this, and a lot of people who are really good at grazing are still actually in our network. So that's been cool. What I really like is the ecology part of it and the community, and just really just with the animals, with our dairy cows, they're really happy. They grow well. We've just created a system where it's the cows will basically follow you anywhere you go. You get to be the shepherd in a sense, and it's just friendly. It's a friendly system. Like, we can go. We know all the cattle and calves, everybody individually, and the dogs like running out there to the pasture. I have a pasture cat too, and it's just a fun way to work in nature. So
I like the idea of a pasture cat.
right.
For me, it's like the lion on the veld or the savannah, but miniaturized.
He is probably honestly worth thousands of dollars, because he patrols like the bales, all that stuff, keeps everything feed quality high, and
Amazing.
it's just, yeah.
Well, I definitely don't have to tell either of you that it's been a pretty dry year so far. We have seen very little rain in May and June here in 2023. In fact, it's the second driest May-June combo that Wisconsin's seen, at least here in southern Wisconsin, where I'm at. And I'm wondering, kind of, how does rotational grazing play into that? How can you use rotational grazing to help extend the grazing season as long as possible and keep your cows out on the grass, or other livestock as well?
Well, one thing about the weather, climate, however people want to look at it, it's always variable. And the best thing about the managed grazing system is the flexibility. And for whatever rain we did get this year, every bit of it has gone to use. So we have cover, like, even from fall, we have good ground cover, living plants, living soil biology. And this year we had early snow cover, and it didn't really freeze on a lot of the below that soil surface, so we could put fence posts in most places all winter. So when we did get rains, that got into the soil. So the biggest thing is, like, we're resource based, and we're trying to always protect and maintain everything that we get on the farm. Like, I think some strategies that have maybe for the future is looking at possibly doing like an irrigation pond, but with what we have, we had a really good first round of grazing. Our second round has been I would say good, but it's starting to diminish a bit because of the dry. And we always have to have our backup plans, right? So like we have looked at our harvest window for our hay crop and how we kind of integrate that in with the grazing side of it to set up our just like the pattern we do of moving the cattle across that farm. So it's always a balancing act, like, you know, really trying to do the maximum amount of growth we can get when we have, you know, we start getting that solar energy available to us to convert this pasture into good quality forage. So a lot of strategies. Some of it is also like what we've interseeded over the years, you know, plants that are adapted a little bit better to, you know, these variable conditions, and kind of utilizing the things that the graze what grows to our maximum, you know, benefit. So, and then really sticking with the principles of the timing, not overgrazing, not taking that. Say when the pasture starts to regrow, we definitely want to stay off of that until it has a chance to really express itself. I think she's got a lot more too here.
Some of the strategies that we've begun to, you know, we always pay attention to what we get for moisture. And in the process, once the grazing starts in the springtime, we're just keenly aware of where we're going and where we want to be across the landscape within that 30 to 45 day period. We keep a very tight eye on how much the herd is actually taking down. And so if we go in and the grass is like 20 inches tall, and we know that we're headed for a deficit with moisture, instead of taking it down to 6 inches, we'll probably leave 12 behind so that there's adequate photosynthetic area for that plant to not really have to pull out of root reserves to grow photosynthetic area to then begin the regrowth process, which typically takes about 4 to 6 days, depending on the species of the grass, once it's been harvested or bitten off by the cow. We don't want to get into stored feed too early. And so we may pull in a hay field or two so that we stay with that longer rest period, which gives the forage plants an opportunity to take care of themselves. And so we've gone to slightly larger paddocks. Our grazing time has been typically in that 12 to 24 hours per rotation, per movement across the paddock. But we want to really leave a good base of residual material. It protects the soil from, 95 degrees. You can take a thermometer and put it in a grass stand at 6 inches tall, and the soil temperature will be 10 to 15 degrees cooler than bare soil right next to it. And that's important because then we're not losing soil moisture by it radiating off by keeping it in the shade.
Yeah, and Mary C., when you're talking about moving those livestock like every 12 to 24 hours, are you keeping those stocking rates higher during a dry period than you usually would, or what kind of stocking rates are you thinking with that per paddock?
Because we're making our paddocks larger. Primarily we use polywire. Some folks will use poly tape. We do the polywire. It's lightweight, it's mobile, geared reels, pigtail posts. So mobile fencing is critical. We're making our paddocks larger and giving them less time in that individual paddock. so they're not overgrazing it. You really want to be sure to leave a lot of residual material. And so our stocking rates per acre are actually lower during drought times than they are in a normal moisture cycle.
Sounds good. Yeah. Both of you have seen a ton of different grazing systems around Wisconsin. And so what are a couple of the most common ways that a grazer can maximize their forage utilization while maintaining their stands? And Mary C., you already started that conversation with talking about residual. Is there anything you wanted to add to that before seeing what Kevin has to say?
You really want to run your stock calculations. You want to be accurate. The book work tells us that an animal unit is 1,000 pounds. And I've seen a number of producers that, well, they say an animal unit, is 1,000 pounds. And it's like, well, look at your livestock. I know that my animal units are not 1,000 pounds. My animal units, a cow is going to be 1.4. If she's got a calf outside, that's going to be another, that's going to add a couple tenths back onto that. So when you do your stock calculations, you want to be really accurate on your weights, because if your weights are too low, then you will always overgraze. And so knowing your stock weights and your stock calculations, what is appropriate per acre on your farm based on your soil types, is critical. And Kevin, do you want to add a little bit to that?
I think that's, the whole thing about planning and looking at your soil type, kind of your temperature zone, and there's so many factors into this. Also, the type of stock you have. Beef animals are different than dairy, if we're talking specifically with cattle. I have almost two different styles now with my young stock, and say like I have like calves that can go from calf size up to like a 1,600 or whatever pound steer. They have different forage requirements, both this daily calculation of how much dry matter and the quality and type of dry matter you're looking at. So like for one thing I'm doing with this drought management is I've basically stockpiled, I have probably about 70 acres that hasn't been hayed or grazed yet this year, and I'm going into some pasture that's even like, the grass part of it would be 4 to 6 feet tall, and actually the legumes are just starting to flower. So we had kind of a delay on legumes, but the grasses got out pretty fast this year. But I'm giving them like tighter breaks, but which means I give them a little bit smaller area, but then 2 or 3 times a day moves through there. And then I have about 8-inch residual that gets oftentimes kind of like matted down a bit as a cover. And then, we have a chance to, like Mary said, like this armor on the soil to protect it from, too much direct sunlight, and something there to capture even if we get dews in the morning. So there's with managed grazing, it's the management, right? And there's so many variables, and I think that's where the experimentation, basically monitoring and seeing what's happening, and always remembering that the rest period on the pasture is like that the rest is the absolute key, I think, to any of this. Like when we've traditionally thought of pasture in Wisconsin, it's been this farmers traditionally would put cattle out and they just stay out on 40 acres and kind of wander around, right? And we had some people that did actually break it down into maybe 5-acre fields historically, and then they'd rotate every 2 weeks or something. But getting down to this intensity where we can use polywire, and now even it's kind of on the forefront of this, but even the possibility of like the virtual fencing, there's just more options, and I think we'll have even more options as we go. But setting up fence to me is like it's fun. It's like I'm out in working where I want to be, working with the cattle, and it's good exercise. So for me, it's there's just there's a lot of side benefits with it too. So
there's that factor as well.
Right. I mean, you're just taking a hike and walk through nature all the time. So that's cool.
There are a lot worse jobs than that one, that's for sure. I kind of want to go back to something that you'd mentioned earlier, Kevin, when you talked about interseeding different species and how that can, change management or whatever. We're in an adverse condition as far as the growing season goes. We've been talking about with drought. And I'm wondering, other than, using rotational grazing as a tool to maintain those residuals in order to have continued grass growth when we have very little rain, what other management strategies can you do for your pastures, like species selection, in order to make them more resilient to kind of extreme weather like what we're seeing right now?
We kind of started out like with the idea of graze what grows, right? And that does work very well. There's definitely huge potential there. But also, like, we've also learned, like through these years, seeing what's working on other farms, and now some seed companies and researchers looking at different varieties, and coming up with these different pasture mixes. And it's actually some imported species from primarily Europe, cool season grass, a lot of it. They do fit in pretty well and mesh well with our particular environment. And where I've done that is like where we have sites where we outwinter the cattle and we have a little bit of hoof traffic or damage and we might replant. That's where we've primarily done a lot of this, and then we've done some no-till also into existing pasture. But I've seen really good results with things like meadow fescue and some better clovers. Going to this more diversity, like getting things like plantain, chicory, just a wide variety of grasses. Trying for other legumes. We can't necessarily replant alfalfa into an existing alfalfa stand, obviously, but having that diversity just seems to promote better resilience, whether it's wet or dry, because there's hopefully a different root profile, some differences there. Like the alfalfa will definitely tap into deeper soil water reserve. The kind of locally adapted things that we've been able to plant in Wisconsin, we have this a meadow fescue that's looking pretty good. If we could get more research and more, there's just so an incredible amount of potential in the genetics of pasture that I would like to see studied and developed. And I think we have just a huge amount of gain that we can do there.
Well, and I think, Kevin, the point you're really trying to get right down to is you got to have diversity. And monocultures put you in a very precarious situation because one species may not do well in certain conditions, and another species, the more species of legumes, grasses that you have in your paddock sward benefits you on a multitude of levels. we graze a lot of alfalfa because a percentage of our property is sandy, very drouthy. Pod irrigation works as well. You can use, adding water always helps. On the public land side, what we've experienced, especially when we've been grazing warm season grasses, that they do have a place within the grazing system. Why? Because warm season grasses, they like it when it's hot. They grow well when it's hot and dry. Some of the issues with the warm season grasses is it takes a number of years to get them established. And unless you're, I'm going to say, land rich, it's hard to plant a group of seeds and wait for 3 years before you really get a productive crop out of it. And so diversity across your pastures will help manage drought situations, excessive water situations, and it's really the art of grazing tied in with the species of what you have. If somebody's attempting to start a grazing farm where there's been extensive corn and soybean production, don't graze what grows because you won't be happy with it. You're going to need to put seed into the ground to get a good sward that's a good nutritional mix, because we're also looking for nutrition, right? To keep the livestock, whether it's goats, sheep, hogs, beef cattle, dairy cattle, young stock, older stock, we really want to provide them the best feed possible, and having a good eclectic mix will help kind of armor you against some of these drought conditions that we're experiencing now.
It's always fun to talk about all these different ways that grazing systems can hone in on their resilience and adapt to different conditions that we're faced with in different years, and how well livestock can perform on that. But I do want to start kind of wrapping up and bringing us home. So I'll ask you guys a question that we tend to ask a version of in every episode of Field Notes. And that is just, if you had one piece of advice for someone that might be interested in adopting a grazing system or improving their current grazing system, what would it be? And then Mary C. will have you answer that first.
One piece? Only one piece?
One piece, maybe two.
This is
That
a
one
pie.
piece can have a lot of parts.
Yeah.
Yes, definitely. There's two things I really want to hone in on. One of them is soil sampling. Just because you're entering a managed grazing system, it's not like the pasture systems of old where it's wasteland. It's maybe too steep to farm, maybe too wet to farm. If you're putting your pasture system on good productive ag land, that is going to be your ticket to win. Pay attention, manage your soils. Don't forget, good soil science is good soil science, right? Also, get linked up with a grazing network, because the mechanics of a grazing system are relatively simple. There's fence, there's electricity, and there's tools to move the livestock, right? Water systems, laneways. The mechanics are very simple, but there's art involved in managed grazing. And that's where having that peer support from a grazing network, a farmer in your neighborhood who's a seasoned grazer, can really help you avoid some of the stumbling blocks that you may encounter, because grazers love to talk about successes and they love to talk about failures. And it's a great way to ensure that they can improve their existing or really get off on the right foot in development of a grazing system on their property. Kevin, what is the one piece of advice that you want to share?
The one piece, I think honestly, with the way farming is, the absolute number one best thing I love about grazing is just the people. Meeting somebody like Mary in the grazing networks, and getting getting all these, great pieces of advice, and I think having this attitude of just continuous learning and, listening and seeing, observing everything. That's what makes a great farmer and a great grazer. And, we have that. And I think it's, when I think back to, like, say 30 years ago, there's been, markets are developed. There's, just so much more knowledge, and, just a ton of people that we can visit with. And I think that's the number one thing I would say. And on the grazing farming side of it, the way that you can make it to some of these meetings is absolutely develop a good, efficient fencing system. I don't care how how fancy or expensive it is, but it has to be effective, and it has to get done in time so that you can do all these other things. That's just an absolute key. I think you really also have to have a love for the livestock. That's, on my side is, working in dairy. I really do like the dairy cows. I like equipment, but it's kind of that's not the driver. I love hay equipment, but the more time I don't spend in the tractor, the better at this point. So the thing like an ATV or, whatever bike, things that just make all of these movements easier. I consider that as part of my fencing management tools.
Yeah. Well, words of advice from the experts, and a shameless plug for Kevin's organization talking about grazing networks. If you're interested in connecting with your local grazing networks, go ahead and visit grassworks.org to find out who's grazing in your neighborhood and who you can talk to asking advice, or just contact Kevin. Well, Kevin and Mary C, thanks so much for coming on today. We really appreciate it.
Happy grazing, everybody.
Thanks for listening. This has been Field Notes from UW-Madison Extension. My name is Will Fulwider, Regional Crops Educator for Dane and Dodge counties. And I was joined by my co-host Michael Geissinger, Outreach Specialist in Northwest Wisconsin for the Nutrient and Pest Management Program of UW-Madison. A big thank you to Joe Ryan for creating our theme music, and to Abby Wilkie-Maki for our logo. If you have any questions about anything you've heard today, or about your farming practices in general, reach out to the Extension Agriculture Educators serving your region.